He only gave me three things as a director. He said, lower your voice, don't use your hands, and look directly into Cary Grant's eyes at all times.
What if one of the most glamorous films in Hollywood history was built on something far less dazzling than it seemed? In 1959, Eva Marie Saint became the elegant, mysterious leading lady in Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest, a role that cemented her place in cinematic history. The on-screen chemistry, the polished style, and the seamless tension seemed effortless. But behind the scenes, it was anything but effortless, and certainly not always pleasant. Hitchcock was more than just a master of suspense. He was a master of control. His sets were meticulously orchestrated, and his actors were expected to surrender not just their performance, but their instincts. For decades, Saint spoke only of the brilliance. Yet now, with the safety of time, she has begun to share the other side of the story, one where genius came with a cost, and the spotlight hid shadows few could see. In the summer of 1958, Eva Marie Saint walked onto a soundstage at MGM with every reason to believe she was about to experience the pinnacle of her career. She had an Academy Award for On the Waterfront under her belt, and now she was the leading lady in an Alfred Hitchcock production alongside Cary Grant, arguably the most charming man in Hollywood. The role of Eve Kendall in North by Northwest promised glamour, intrigue, and the kind of screen immortality that every actress dreamed of. To the outside world, it was a golden ticket. Hitchcock's productions were famous for their polish. Wardrobes were custom-made by the best costumers in the business. Lighting was sculpted to flatter every frame. Dialogue was trimmed to sparkle like a diamond. For North by Northwest, Saint's appearance was engineered with the precision of a watchmaker. Hitchcock personally approved every outfit: the sleek suits in soft pastels, the silk blouses that caught and reflected the studio lights, the perfectly matched accessories. Even her hair was altered to suit his vision. He asked her to lower her hairline by a fraction of an inch, convinced it would add an air of mystery to her face. To the public, these were charming anecdotes about a meticulous director. To those working with him, they were a glimpse into his need to control every possible detail. From the very first rehearsal, Hitchcock's influence went far beyond wardrobe. He gave Saint notes not just on her lines, but on the way she stood, the way she breathed, even the precise angle at which she should tilt her chin when looking at Cary Grant. When she naturally gestured with her hands during a scene, he stopped her mid-sentence. Movement, he explained, pulled focus from the tension he wanted to create. At first, she thought of these as harmless eccentricities, a genius fine-tuning his masterpiece. But the more he directed her every breath and glance, the more she began to feel like she was being stripped of her own instincts. It was not collaboration, it was orchestration. On set, everything felt choreographed, down to seemingly casual conversations. The charm of Hollywood's most elegant thriller was being built in an environment where spontaneity had no place. And while audiences would see an unforgettable performance, Saint was already beginning to feel the weight of the invisible strings Hitchcock was pulling. What she could not have known then was that this control was only the beginning, and that the real strain of working with Hitchcock had little to do with physical direction, and everything to do with the mind games that would soon follow. If Hitchcock's obsession with control was obvious in the way he dressed and positioned Eva Marie Saint, it became even more intense when he began to shape her psychology on set. His directing style was famously unlike that of most of his peers. Rather than working collaboratively to explore emotional truth, he preferred to construct a performance from the outside in, treating actors less like creative partners and more like finely tuned instruments to be played exactly as he wished. For Saint, that meant her every reaction, every movement, had to be calibrated to his internal metronome. Hitchcock's instructions were often deceptively simple, but each carried significant weight. He told her to lower her voice to an almost conspiratorial whisper in certain exchanges with Cary Grant, explaining that it would make the audience lean forward, creating intimacy and tension. He forbade her from blinking during pivotal moments, claiming it would make her gaze more piercing, her presence more unreadable. Even her breathing was dictated. A deliberate pause here, a sharp inhale there, each chosen not for her comfort, but for the rhythm of suspense he wanted. In Hitchcock's world, emotions were not discovered in the moment. They were engineered, line by line, breath by breath, exactly as instructed. At first, Saint accepted these directives without protest. She was working with the most celebrated director in the world, a man whose track record seemed to justify his methods. But slowly, she began to realize the toll it was taking. Scenes that should have flowed naturally now felt like walking a tightrope in a windstorm. She could not simply think about her character's motivations. She had to count steps, monitor her gaze, remember the exact inflection of a syllable. Instinct had no place in this environment. Every creative choice she might have made for herself had already been made for her. Hitchcock also employed silence as a form of control. If she delivered a take that met his approval, he would say almost nothing, perhaps a faint nod or a clipped "fine." If she strayed from his vision, he would pause, letting the silence swell, as if measuring how far she had fallen short before offering a cool correction. That deliberate withholding of affirmation became its own form of pressure, keeping her in a constant state of seeking his approval, second-guessing even the moments she believed were flawless. The effect was cumulative. By the middle of the shoot, she was no longer performing just for the camera. She was performing for Hitchcock's invisible scoreboard, every take a pass or fail exam in his eyes. The pressure was constant, subtle, and unrelenting. Yet what she did not yet realize was that the most taxing part of his control was still ahead. Hitchcock's influence would soon reach beyond the physical and technical, deep into the emotional core of the story, blurring the lines between character and actress in ways that would test her far more than any blocking or line delivery ever could. By the midpoint of North by Northwest's production, Eva Marie Saint was beginning to understand that Hitchcock's genius came with an unspoken price. It was not simply that he demanded precision, it was that he seemed to thrive on keeping his actors slightly off balance. For Saint, this meant living in a state of constant readiness, never sure when the next instruction, critique, or subtle manipulation would come. The pressure was not loud or chaotic, it was quiet, calculated, and always present. Hitchcock had a way of drawing performances out of actors by deliberately creating an atmosphere that mirrored the tension of the story. On screen, Eve Kendall was meant to be a woman hiding her true motives, balancing charm with deceit. Off-screen, Saint sometimes felt she was being asked to live that role in real life. There were moments when Hitchcock would withhold key details about a scene until just before the cameras rolled, forcing her to deliver a reaction that was genuinely startled or unsettled. In one sequence, he refused to tell her how Cary Grant's character would respond, ensuring her surprise looked authentic. It was a clever trick for the audience, but for Saint, it chipped away at her sense of control over her own performance. Even more draining were the psychological games he played between takes. Hitchcock had a reputation for testing the boundaries of his actors, making comments that were half compliments and half criticisms, designed to keep them uncertain about where they stood. Saint later admitted that this could be emotionally exhausting. She never quite knew if she was earning his approval or being quietly judged. While he was never overtly cruel to her, his manner was precise and clinical, rarely offering the warmth or camaraderie that might have balanced his demands. For weeks, Saint pushed through it, telling herself that the end result would justify the process. And to some degree, she was right. The dailies showed a performance that was magnetic, layered, and perfectly in sync with Hitchcock's vision. But she could feel the cost mounting. Acting, for her, had always been about connection and instinct. Now it was about compliance and control. It was as though the emotional core of her craft had been replaced by a set of invisible rules that she was forbidden to break. Still, she kept going, holding on to her professionalism even as the tension deepened. But Hitchcock was not done shaping her experience, because the most pivotal scenes and the most demanding mind games were still ahead. When North by Northwest premiered in the summer of 1959, it was instantly hailed as one of Alfred Hitchcock's crowning achievements. The film was a sweeping success, both commercially and critically. It broke box office records for a thriller, cementing Hitchcock's reputation as a master of visual storytelling, and became an instant reference point for suspense cinema. The critical reception was equally enthusiastic. Reviewers praised its sharp wit, breathtaking set pieces, and the magnetic interplay between Cary Grant's urbane charm and Eva Marie Saint's cool sophistication. Every element seemed perfectly balanced, from Ernest Lehman's script to Bernard Herrmann's urgent score. On screen, Saint appeared effortless. Her Eve Kendall was alluring yet unreadable, a woman whose motives seemed to shift like the scenery rushing past a train window. The chemistry with Grant was electric, but her performance had a self-contained elegance that was rare even among the era's top leading ladies. She could convey volumes with a single glance, a raised eyebrow, or the faintest shift in her posture. Critics described her as mysterious, poised, and utterly convincing, a performance that looked like it had flowed naturally from instinct. But in reality, very little of what audiences saw was left to instinct. Every precisely timed pause, every carefully measured movement had been shaped by Hitchcock's relentless direction. Saint's voice was modulated to match his idea of tension. Her stillness was crafted to draw the eye exactly where he wanted it. The character on screen, though brought to life through her talent, was in many ways Hitchcock's creation. A composite built from her body, her voice, her physical presence, all filtered through his exacting vision. The film's success only magnified this paradox. Hitchcock's status as a cinematic genius was elevated yet again. Industry insiders spoke of his brilliance with renewed awe. Meanwhile, Saint found herself in the unusual position of being both proud and quietly unsettled. She could not deny the exhilaration of seeing the final cut, knowing it would live on as one of the great Hollywood thrillers. But she also carried the private knowledge of how emotionally taxing the process had been, how the glamour hid the reality of a set, where spontaneity was forbidden, and trust in one's instincts was quietly dismantled, scene by scene. Publicly, she said nothing of this. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, speaking critically of a director of Hitchcock's stature was not simply frowned upon. It could be career-ending. The unwritten rule was clear. An actress, particularly in a male-dominated industry, was expected to show gratitude, not dissent. So she smiled for the cameras, offered charming anecdotes, and let the public imagine that the experience had been as charmed as the finished product appeared. Privately, the memories were more complex. She recalled the constant vigilance, the second-guessing, the sense of being shaped into something just slightly apart from herself. Yet for decades, she kept those thoughts locked away. Only much later, when time had loosened the grip of Hollywood's old codes, would she begin to tell the fuller story of the subtle manipulations, the emotional strain, and the psychological games that had been just as real a part of North by Northwest as the famous crop duster attack or the climactic chase across Mount Rushmore. And when she finally did, those revelations would not only reshape how audiences saw the film, but also how they saw Alfred Hitchcock himself. For decades after North by Northwest, Eva Marie Saint's public comments about Alfred Hitchcock carried a tone of admiration, even warmth. She spoke of his brilliance, his meticulous control over every aspect of production, and the privilege of working with Cary Grant under his direction. To the casual listener, these were fond recollections of a golden moment in a distinguished career. He told stories that fit the public's idea of Hitchcock: quirky, exacting, and unfailingly creative. On the surface, it seemed as if the shoot had been nothing short of extraordinary. But to those who knew her best, there was always the sense that something remained unsaid. In private, she avoided revisiting certain details. She did not contradict the praise, but neither did she elaborate on the more personal side of the experience. It was as though she had placed a protective seal over that part of her memory, one she was unwilling to break until the time was right. That time came much later, well into her 80s. By then, she was a living legend in her own right. Her career was long established, her reputation beyond reproach, and Hitchcock had been gone for decades. The professional and cultural pressures that once discouraged actors, especially women, from speaking candidly about powerful directors, had eased. The risk of being misunderstood or blacklisted was gone. And so, slowly at first, she began to peel back the layers. In interviews and public appearances, she hinted at the truth, that working under Hitchcock could be emotionally draining, that his dominance over the creative process left little space for an actor's own interpretation. She spoke of feeling, at times, less like an actress, and more like a pawn in a carefully plotted game of cinematic chess, moved precisely where he wanted her. Her actions dictated not by instinct, but by instruction. The methods he used to maintain this control were rarely overt. They were quiet, deliberate, and inescapable. He withheld certain key details until just before filming, ensuring that her reactions on camera carried a raw, unpolished edge. He rationed his praise so sparingly that it became a kind of currency on set, a reward doled out only when she met his exacting standards. And he fostered an environment in which no one, not even his leading lady, would dare question his decisions. The pressure to comply was constant, reinforced by his reputation as a visionary who always knew best. What surprised many was her revelation that his influence extended beyond the set. Even in moments away from the camera, Hitchcock's presence lingered. He might comment on her appearance at a public function, her phrasing in an interview, or the way she spoke about the film, subtle reminders that, in his mind, the performance did not end when the cameras stopped rolling. The role of Eve Kendall was not just a part she played on screen, it became a persona she was expected to embody in public life. These late-life confessions reframed one of Hollywood's most celebrated collaborations. No longer was it simply the story of a master director guiding an actress to greatness. It was also the story of a woman navigating the psychological demands of a man whose artistry was inseparable from his need for control. Saint never denied that North by Northwest was a masterpiece, but she made it clear that the creation of that masterpiece had required a kind of endurance the public never saw. For the audience, the film remained a seamless blend of elegance and intrigue. For her, it was also a memory of fatigue, constant self-monitoring, and the quiet pressure of working under someone whose genius was matched by his dominance. When she finally shared these truths, decades after the fact, it startled longtime fans who had clung to the image of Hitchcock as a benign maestro. But for Saint, it was simply honesty, a truth she had chosen to guard until the moment felt right. And in speaking it aloud, she invited the world to reconsider not just her performance, but the legacy of the man who had shaped it so completely. Eva Marie Saint's memories of North by Northwest serve as a quiet but powerful reminder that the creation of a cinematic masterpiece is rarely as effortless as it appears on screen. For audiences, the film remains a jewel in Alfred Hitchcock's crown, a perfect fusion of suspense, sophistication, and visual artistry. It is studied in film schools, celebrated in retrospectives, and consistently ranked among the greatest thrillers ever made. Yet for the woman at its center, the elegance and polish that defined the finished product came at a deeply personal cost. It was a price paid in emotional stamina, the erosion of creative autonomy, the gradual surrender of her instincts to the unyielding vision of one man. Her later reflections do not erase the brilliance of the film, nor do they wholly condemn Hitchcock's artistry. Rather, they complicate the narrative. They remind us that the myth of the solitary genius, the master director shaping every frame, often overlooks the human experiences that make that vision possible. In Saint's case, it meant navigating a working environment where brilliance and control were inseparable, where artistry was achieved alongside a quiet, unspoken strain. When audiences revisit North by Northwest today, they may still be swept away by the glamour of Eve Kendall, the poised, mysterious figure trading double meanings with Cary Grant in a dining car or running for her life across the jagged faces of Mount Rushmore. But now, there is another layer to consider. Beneath the cool elegance lies the endurance of Eva Marie Saint herself, whose performance was shaped not only by her skill, but also by her ability to adapt, persist, and deliver under constant constraint. It is a testament to her professionalism that the audience never saw the tension, never sensed the fatigue. Yet knowing the story behind the scenes changes the way we see her work. It becomes not just a triumph of craft, but of resilience. And perhaps that is the enduring truth Saint has given us in finally sharing her experience, that what dazzles on screen often has shadows just outside the frame, and that the cost of brilliance is not always visible in the light of the projector. That truth lingers long after the credits roll.